And welcome to this edition, this May 12th, 2015 edition of the O'Hara News and Editorial. Sorry for the late start. We had a couple technical difficulties. We have as our guest Vernon Beck. He's with us right now. Hello, Mr. Beck. How are you?
Hi, Robert. How are you doing?
Doing really good. Glad to have you here with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me onto the show.
Mr. Beck is with Canada Court Watch, and we will be talking about his organization and the activism that they've been engaged in for quite some time now. It's going to be a great show. And as always, we have a few stories that we want to cover. And Mr. Beck, feel free to comment. We may ask you to comment on some of these stories. We always do a couple of news stories at the beginning of the show before we get on to our guest. So we'll go ahead and get started. James, do you want to do your stories first, or do you want to do mine first?
I'll go ahead and run a quick story here. We've got Jessica Valenti is a noisy creep. If you don't know who Jessica Valenti is, well, she's a feminist. That's all she ever talks about. It's her entire identity. If you do know who she is, you might not know how gross and problematic she is. By her own admission, this guy sitting next to me on the subway was checking Twitter. He followed almost all the same people I did, but no women. Passive sexism is for real. Now, this came out on her Twitter here, and the answer to that, of course, is passive sexism meet active stalking. Imagine this deeply disturbed woman spying on you on the subway and then, on the basis of a few minutes' proximity with you, branding you an agent of her own personal boogeyman, emphasis on the word man. Then she tells the whole world about it. What's next, Jessica? Tapping people's phones for evidence of their passive sexism? Sounds like we need to set up a new government agency to combat this menace. Call it the Bureau Overseeing Surveillance of Suspicious Y Chromosomes, or BOSSY. That badge would look terrific on you. The feminists have won, but their whole worldview falls apart if they're not the victims. So, they have to go to greater and more ridiculous lengths to paint themselves as such. But then if they had a sense of shame, they wouldn't be feminists. We've gone way beyond microaggressions now. Offending somebody who doesn't like what she sees while looking over your shoulder is a nanoaggression. I'll leave the last word to my friend Lisa, a traitor to womankind. Explains manspreading. Who wants creepy women reading their phones? Jessica Valenti is a creep.
I'll leave it to Jessica Valenti to write something crazy that we can all laugh at. I mean, she's a never-ending source of material. It's always been. I mean, I think, I don't know. It's kind of weird. I guess she's maybe kind of delusional. Well, of course she's delusional. To think that there are masses of people that still think that she is as relevant as she was 5 years ago, and she's always writing something very silly. Always writing.
The thing is the stuff that she writes, the Tumblr feminists eat up like it's manna from heaven.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we eat it up too, because there's always something like crazy. I mean, it's always something very, very stupid that. Pardon me, I just sneezed. It's easy to make fun of. I don't know how else to say it. It's just she's always an endless source of material, that woman. So
yeah, absolutely.
You can imagine, just like, back to the subject of the story. You know, you're on the subway. Pardon me. You're on the subway and you're doing your tweets, and of course, like, you can tell who all the people you follow are by looking over someone's shoulder and on their iPhone or whatever, and like, seriously, she had to have made that up, or had to have been that had to have been some sort of delusional thing she pulled out of the air. I can't imagine.
No. I for some reason, I'm really seeing her with a set of opera glasses here.
Okay, you might be right. You may actually have a special device that can actually, like, intercept the signal from the cell phone to the carrier and Wi-Fi in the train or whatever. I don't know. Crazy, but always a source of endless entertainment with that woman. I don't know. Vernon, you have anything to say about Jessica Valenti in this regard? Because I don't know if you're familiar with who she is, but
I guess I got to admit I'm not familiar with who she is, mainly because I guess we're from Canada, and I guess most of our focus is on I guess what's happening in this country. So
sure, yeah, she's a favorite. She's a favorite person amongst MRAs to lambast. She's constantly saying something stupid, and she's a feminist, and she's a feminist commentator, and she's popular in this country.
Well, she also founded Feministing, which for a while was a major feminist publication. Right. Not any longer.
No,
it's seriously gone downhill. Because they started out very rabid, and they did what they had to do as far as being rabid and promoting as much misandry as they possibly could.
Well, that was back when that paid. That was back before people called them out on it, and it wasn't that long. It wasn't that long. Funny.
I've got a couple issues here. I'm going to have to restart my browser, so you guys go ahead.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and go on with my first story, rather, and by the time I'm done talking about it, I'm sure you'll be all set up. So, this story is coming from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. I think it's good news. It is written by Graham Moomal. Interesting name, Graham Moomal. And it is titled. It was published today at 2:45 p.m. So this is brand new. It is titled, UVA Dean Files Defamation Lawsuit Over Rolling Stone Rape Story. Yay, we love these lawsuits. Great. A dean at the University of Virginia has filed a defamation lawsuit against Rolling Stone, claiming the magazine falsely portrayed her as unresponsive to the explosive rape allegation at the center of a now retracted article. Nicole Aramal, Associate Dean of Students at UVA, named the magazine and writer Sarah Rubin elderly as defendants. Filed in Charlottesville Circuit Court, the suit seeks $7.85 million in compensatory and punitive damages. The lawsuit alleges Rolling Stone and Erdely sought to cast Iramo, who works with sexual assault victims, as the, quote, chief villain of the story, unquote, and the personification of UVA's, quote, alleged institutional indifference to rape. This is hysterical. The suit characterizes, quote, the quote, defamatory and false statements concerning Iramo as the work of a wanton journalist and malicious publisher. Quote, they had serious doubts about the truth of the disparaging claims they planned to make about Dean Iramo, but intentionally violated commonly accepted journalistic norms and consciously failed to investigate sources and information that they believed would have revealed the falsity of the charges they leveled, the lawsuit says. There's a link to the lawsuit. I'll go ahead and put that in the discussion bar. Rolling Stone could not immediately be reached for comment. The magazine's article, published last fall, recounted a rape allegation by a female student identified only as Jackie, who claimed she was brutally raped at a party hosted by the UVA chapter of the Phi Kappa Psi fraternity. Charlottesville police have found no evidence to substantiate the allegation, and Rolling Stone has retracted the article and apologized. The article suggested Iramo was indifferent to Jackie's alleged assault. The lawsuit cites specific passages from the article, including a key paragraph that said, quote, a whole new kind of abuse, unquote, began for Jackie when she tried to hold her alleged attackers accountable. Jackie did not try to hold her supposed assailants accountable. In fact, adamantly refused to file a report with UVA or to file a complaint or participate in a police investigation after Dean Iramo arranged for Jackie to meet with police, the lawsuit says. As a result of the article, The lawsuit says Ramos suffered from embarrassment, quote, unspeakable abuse in emails and online comments, and stress that caused complications in her medical treatment for breast cancer. As a woman who has dedicated her life to assisting victims of sexual assault and domestic abuse, Dean Ramos saw herself tarred in the national press as the chief architect of a conspiracy to suppress Jackie's assault in order to protect UVA's reputation, the lawsuit says. Dean Ramos received a wave of emails and letters from people across the country attacking her as, among other things, evil, a wretched rape apologist, and a disgusting, worthless piece of trash. The lawsuit also highlights an illustration that accompanied the article saying that Rolling Stone edited a photograph of Ramos, quote, to give the appearance of Dean Ramos sitting at her desk, sneering while a sexual assault victim sits crying in front of her. Several of Jackie's claims could have been disproven, the suit says. If Rolling Stone and Editorial had pressed Jackie to waive federal privacy laws related to student records, which would have given the magazine access to confidential records. Editorial and Rolling Stone made a calculated decision not to ask Jackie for a FERPA waiver to purposefully avoid the facts they would learn from receiving the records, the suit says. In a written statement, UVA reiterated its criticism of the article as, quote, an example of irresponsible journalism, and said the school fully supports and appreciates the professional competency and contributions of Dean Ramos. Dean Ramos is well within her rights to pursue this private legal action, the statement read. At Rolling Stone's request, the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism reviewed the magazine's processes in reporting and editing the story. The authors of the Columbia report concluded the collapse of the story's main narrative was, quote, a story of journalistic failure that was unavoidable. The fraternity has also threatened legal action against Rolling Stone. Now I have a couple things to say about this. First of all, I think it is hysterical that one of these people from the sexual grievance industry, this woman at UVA, who's the Dean of Student Affairs, whose job it is to handle student complaints of sexual assault or whatever, amongst a whole laundry list of other things, is suing Rolling Stone for libel. This is really interesting. It's really ironic that one of their own is suing and has a really good chance of winning. And also, she's finally somebody is suing for big bucks in this whole Title IX rape hysteria thing. Finally, somebody is suing for some serious money. The lawsuits that I've seen up until now have been asking for paltry sums of money, like $20,000 or $30,000. That's nothing. It's always these guys. I don't know, that they're scared to be seen as harming the alleged victim. It's just it's so silly. You know, if someone had falsely accused me of rape and got me kicked out of school, I'd be asking for a lot more than $15,000. A whole lot more. Now, finally, somebody is suing for real money, and it's somebody who's in the same camp as these people are, in the exact same camp. And I also find it interesting that this woman is suing, but the actual fraternity that was accused in this whole thing, they're not. They still haven't filed a lawsuit yet. What's wrong here? What's wrong with these guys that are falsely accused of rape? They do not file, and this whole thing's blown. This whole thing's gotten totally out of control. And the one tried and true thing that gets things under control in these situations is lawsuits that cost people who break the rules lots of money. That's the only thing that makes it stop. And I just, it's so, first of all, I find it so ironic that somebody in the sexual grievance industry is actually suing Rolling Stone. And I also find interesting that the people who actually really did suffer tremendously this Phi Kappa Psi fraternity has not sued yet. And whenever you do see a lawsuit filed by falsely accused men, it's always for just a small sum of money. Always, I don't think I've seen a single one over $100,000 yet. I don't know how much this kid up in Columbia University is asking for. This Nunsinger guy who's finally suing the school for the whole mattress girl fiasco. I don't know. I think I mentioned that last week. But it's just I haven't seen these big dollar signs I should be seeing, and I'm so glad this woman's suing. But at the same time, I'm disappointed that Phi Kappa Psi has not wised up yet and filed at least an equally massive lawsuit. James, you with us again?
Yes, I am.
Okay, what do you think about that?
I'm hoping that these lawsuits go through.
Sure.
I really am.
At least they get more frequent.
Well, yeah, because they're going to say, well, we don't want to spend the money on the defense, so we better make sure we do things right the first time.
Right. Have you been? Are you familiar at all with what's been going down here in the U.S. with the Title IX rape hysteria and the Dear Colleague letter, and what's been happening at the University of Virginia, amongst other schools here in the U.S., Vernon?
Again, I personally haven't heard much, although I have heard about the article in the Rolling Stones magazine that came across the news here.
Yeah, that whole thing, of course. So you know then that basically the whole thing was exposed as a complete farce, a complete hoax.
Yeah.
So that's actually something that is becoming, and this is the truth, is something that is becoming very, very common here in the U.S. Since there's a whole Title IX rape hysteria thing. Title IX is a set of rules that the Department of Education has to follow to ensure gender equality in schools, and that is expanded to mean protecting women from being raped, because apparently being raped is sexual discrimination. Only if you're a woman, of course, not if you're a man. If you're a man, it's not sexual discrimination if you've been raped. But it's actually, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time explaining it. Maybe some other time when we're not on the air. But just go ahead and James, take it away with your next story.
Give me a second here. So I had some serious issues pulling them up. Yeah.
Are you better now, James?
Sure. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. I'm not having any luck.
Our two guys are...
Got it. We'll just run this one more story here. All 19 women have washed out of the Army Ranger School in the first phase. Okay, now pay very close attention to these numbers. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say this title is a little bit on the clickbait side.
Sure.
Listen to these numbers very carefully. The 8 women who remained in the first gender-integrated class of Army Ranger training will not move forward into the next round of training, Fort Benning announced on Friday. That means all 19 women who began the training in April have washed out in the first phase. The 8 women, listen to this, together with 101 men who washed out of the Derby phase, that's the first phase, will retry the first part of the Army's most elite training course beginning May 14th. I had the opportunity... Oh, it reset. That's weird. I had the opportunity to visit the Ranger students yesterday and was impressed that whether going forward to the mountains or recycling the Derby phase, they were motivated to continue training and focus on successfully completing the Ranger course, said Major General Scott Miller, Commanding General of the Maneuver Center of Excellence. They're a strong group of soldiers who are working their way through the U.S. Army's most physically and mentally demanding course. 35 male soldiers failed to meet the standards of Ranger School and will not attempt the course again, the release said. About 15% of soldiers repeat the first phase. About 75% of those who make it through the first week of the program will eventually pass the Derby phase and move on to the mountains, according to the Airborne and Ranger Training website. Okay? That's, about 37% of all students recycle at least one phase of the Ranger training. Only 115 soldiers of the 400 who attempted the mountain training will be moving into the mountain phase beginning on Saturday. 19 women and 381 men began the first integrated Ranger course. 3 women and 78 men washed out after the first day's physical assessments, consisting of 49 push-ups, 59 sit-ups, a 5-mile run in under 40 minutes, and 6 chin-ups. Following that, soldiers must complete a land navigation test, a swim test, a 12-mile foot march with a 35-pound rucksack in under 3 hours. 8 women and 119 men failed to complete this portion of the course. So, there we have it.
How many is there? So 8 women failed, and how many men?
Over 100.
Okay, so you really can't. I mean, just the fact that all the women failed really doesn't say much when you had 115 men fail.
Right.
It doesn't really say much.
Right.
Because it's obviously a very hard course.
It's a very fucking hard course.
Yeah. So I mean, I know people have been through it, and so do you, James. But of course, I mean, I guess we don't know what's going to happen yet. But they're probably someone's going to scream bloody murder, and they may change the standards to make sure.
That's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that they're going to change the standards.
And you because you're ex-military, you bring up stories like this a lot, much more so than other people would. But of course, the overriding concern is you just can't lower standards for something like this because there are certain specifications that are necessary for the type of job that those people do. It has nothing to do with sex. It has everything to do with the job. And the fact that all the women could not pass is secondary. Are there women out there that can go through this course? Maybe. Let them come try out. But again, using the military as a social engineering tool has always been a bad idea. Anyway, what's going on with the military in Canada, Mr. Beck? Do we have the same type things going on where they're trying to get women into combat forces, and it's not, and of course you have a high failure rate, or there's controversy over whether or not it's going to work? Do you seem to have the same thing that's going on there in Canada? Because here in the U.S., combat forces, that was like 2 years ago when Leon Panetta left.
Now, I guess I can honestly say I can't say that there's, again, the Canadian military certainly isn't anywhere near what the U.S. military, and because it's a major power.
Cool.
Certainly our armed forces are much smaller, and but there are similar problems. There certainly is an attempt to get more women in the military, and I think most Canadians take the position too that if someone can fill the job and
right.
Do it, that's really all that matters.
Right, that's all that matters.
Yeah, I do know from our organization, and even now I'm dealing with one member of the Canadian military. I get usually 2 or 3 every year, but they talk about discrimination as well, mainly when they say if they've served overseas, like in Afghanistan or someplace like that. Sometimes they come back, they find that their wives have left, taken the kids.
Same thing. Yes, same thing here in the U.S.
They've taken the kids, and they're just devastated, and it destroys them.
Here in the U.S., there's actually systems in place that enable military wives to take half the husband's pension after only a 10-year marriage. And these guys often get married again, and then their pension gets halved again after they get divorced after 10 years from that. And here in the U.S., they'll actually pay you double to get married. So they're bribing young men of 19 years old when you really shouldn't get married. to get married, and what happens 2-3 years later? They get a divorce, and all heck breaks loose, and they lose custody of their kids, and we have a huge suicide rate here in the U.S. But this back to the issue of equality in the military. I don't think we can have a meaningful discussion about sexual discrimination in the military until we insist that both male and female citizens, upon turning the age of 18, become adults here in this country, are required to sign up for the selective service. I don't think that you can have any kind of meaningful discussion of discrimination in the military until that problem is corrected. I just, we hear headlines in the news here all the time here in the U.S. about how, women are being discriminated against in the military, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I want to see women have to sign up for selective service when they turn 18. How can you have a meaningful discussion about equality until that happens? I don't know. And then we have this, of course, the story right here. It illustrated that maybe most women are not suited for combat roles. Fine, that's fine. Okay, and some people say, well, that means they shouldn't have to sign up for the draft. Wait a minute. Whoa, wait a minute. Most military jobs, as James, I'm sure you could tell us, are not combat jobs. There's
no,
like
most of them aren't. I mean, a lot of
yeah.
these jobs that are out there, logistics, support, maintenance, things of that nature, even transportation.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way I like to say it is, hey, you may not be able, you as the female may not be able to carry 70 pounds of stuff more than 25 miles in a day and be able to choke someone to death or stab somebody or do any kinds of things that deal with the rigors of combat. You may not be able to do that. And in fact, most men are not able to do that job. I don't think I am capable of doing that kind of job.
And that is true. Most men
are not capable. Yeah,
to do that job. Look.
But here's the thing.
Right out there, the military is great at one thing, and that is to take the dispossessed and turn them into warriors. That's what they do. They take the dispossessed, they turn them into warriors.
But here's the thing.
And I don't necessarily agree with everything that goes on in the military. There were a lot of times when I would get things coming down where the only thing I really could do was look to my left, look to my right, and say, okay, well, my mission is to keep these guys alive. If nothing else, my mission is to keep these guys alive and get us all back home. And I see more and more the games of politics being played inside the military. I mean, it was bad in '92 when I had joined the first time. But ever since I had gone in the second time, I never imagined that I would be sitting in a theater with 300 other guys and a few women listening to what pieces of shit men are. And most of the women looking quite smug, and most of the guys sitting there like, yeah, we're pieces of shit. I guess we're pieces of shit.
Here's the way I put it when it comes, I'm going to go back to the draft thing. I like to say that you may not be able to compete in a combat environment. There's a lot of jobs you may not be able to do because maybe you're smaller or not as strong or don't have the same endurance. But you can drive a truck. You can occupy a radar station. You can do a lot of things. You can dig a hole. You can get in, like you said, logistics, and you can wipe a wounded soldier's ass. Okay, and you should be obliged to do so if your country asks you to do it, irregardless of your gender. And I don't think we can have any kind of conversation about equality until we have that condition. And
look, as long as you meet the standard, right?
Right, sure.
The only problem I have is with a lowering of the standard.
Mm-hmm.
That is my biggest concern, because if we're going to start putting people out there who are ineffectual in combat, just so we can have a PC distribution of men to women
Hmm.
in combat arms, then that's going to kill people.
Right.
And I think
Let's go on to our next story.
I think most members, most people in the public would agree with that as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, who wants? I mean, no one who's a member of the public who relies on the protection of the military, and most intelligent people, voters, citizens, know that at all times, the military is constantly watching over us, and we depend on this service so much. We don't want someone that's not capable of doing their job out there. I don't. Anyway, I'm going to go on to the next story, and I thought this might be of interest to you, Mr. Beck. This is a story from Slate. It is written by Emily Bazelon. Came out last month, but I'm going to go ahead and read it anyway because I think it's important. It is titled Judge Rules That a Mother's Rights Trump the Father's in the Delivery Room. Should a father be allowed in the delivery room for the birth of his child over the mother's objections? A New Jersey judge said no last November in a ruling that was released in writing earlier this week. Any interest a father has before the child's birth is subordinate to the mother's interest, Judge Sohail Mohammed wrote. Interesting. That has to be the right call. At the same time, I can understand why fathers' rights groups see the ruling as discrimination. It privileges motherhood over fatherhood. Rebecca DeLucia and Stephen Plotnick agree that they started a relationship in late 2012 and that DeLucia learned she was pregnant in February 2013. Plotnick proposed and they got engaged. By September, they had broken up. Plotnick wanted to be involved with the pregnancy and with the child, which is good, right? It's what we want fathers to do, but in this case, for whatever reason, Plotnick lawyered up. In October, Plotnick's lawyer wrote to DeLucia, and then she got a lawyer too, and over the next month, letters went back and forth about who would sign the birth certificate. Who would be at the hospital for the birth, and, as Muhammad delicately puts it, whether there would be, quote, litigation to resolve the matter if it could not be resolved amicably. In November, Plotnick sued, saying DeLucia was refusing to let him sign the birth certificate, tell him when she went into labor, or allow him to be present for the delivery. DeLucia responded by denying the first two accusations, but saying that yes, she, quote, will request her privacy in the delivery room, as the judge writes. She said she would put Plotnick's name on the list of visitors for after the delivery, though. That sounds like a pretty good compromise to me. Once the baby is born, it's about the baby. Before that, though, it's about the mother, too. There's just no way to separate her from the fetus. That's the basic reality of the nature that should allow a mother to decide the circumstances of the labor and delivery. Quote, it is inescapable biological fact that the state regulation with respect to the child and a woman is carrying will have a far greater impact on the mother's liberty than on the father's, the Supreme Court said in 1992 in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the case that reaffirmed Roe v. Wade and also held that states can't require women to inform their spouses that they're having an abortion. If a woman doesn't want her ex in the room while she gives birth, an ex who she is not talking to and who, after all, is suing her, then he can wait in the hallway. He'll still have plenty of opportunity to bond with his newborn. Okay, the article goes on. I think this is an interesting thing to talk about. Now, this is one of those hair-splitting things that you might be able to make a case for the mother, to defend the case for the mother in this circumstance. She may not like the guy, this and that, or they broke up, they stopped talking, but at the same time, it's like, wait a minute. She is choosing to have a child with this guy. She has made a decision to do this. after having made that decision, should she be allowed to divorce him from the entire process of going through with the pregnancy? I'm not so sure about this. I think this is an interesting conversation to have. And when I saw this article, I kind of wanted to ask, just because it was something I was looking for articles to talk about tonight, and this is just something that kind of caught my eye. And since we have a guest from Canada Court Watch, which increasingly has dealt with fathers' rights issues, I kind of wanted to ask our guest how he felt about this ruling, just as an interest piece, if nothing else. What do you think about this?
And that's the ruling that the father would not be allowed to come into the delivery room.
Correct.
That certainly would be up for some debate. I think another argument that could be brought in is that possibly this could cause stress maybe on the mother, and yes, probably they could say that that could interfere with the delivery.
Delivery, right, yeah. Right. But I find it that the philosophical angle where we have this woman who had sex with somebody, not just had sex with somebody, but had sex with somebody, unprotected sex with somebody, and planned to have a baby with this certain somebody, and planned to carry through with a pregnancy with this certain somebody. Why is it that this certain somebody could possibly be completely excluded from the process of seeing their child being born? This is really an interesting argument.
I would agree.
I'd like to. It's something. It's one of those things that it's fun to argue about. Well, maybe not fun, but it's something that I think should be pondered.
I would agree with you there. Like I said, I guess I would say that in a sense you're looking at it from kind of a contract perspective. You know, they decide to make a baby, and they should carry through with this contract. But I would say, unfortunately, in life, there's no such thing as really a binding contract when it comes to, I suppose, to people. You might be able to have a binding contract when you're talking about materialistic things such as money or possessions, a house, things like that. But I mean, there are things when it comes down to, I guess, to the biological bodies and that issue of privacy. I mean, my daughter's a nurse, and so I mean, certainly she's in that area of the hospital. I got my second daughter is just going in the nursing program now, but I would say it's an interesting point of conversation, but I would still say that it probably may not actually benefit the child under those circumstances for even the father to be there. And it's just one of those things that you can't enforce equality and enforce a contractual right in something that's biological.
Right, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this, because that was an interesting feature of this story. Where does biology trump equality or equal rights under the law, and vice versa?
Now, maybe
this seemed to be one of those instances where it's like, hey, this is really, really screwed up.
Yeah. Now, could possibly a video be taken, and maybe the father have the right, maybe, to a video to at least see the birth of the child? That might be an argument to maybe counteract that, I suppose, to some extent. But
do you think that this guy should be able to sue for damages for not being able to watch the birth of his child? I mean,
no, I would probably say no. Things in life happen, relationships break up, and
sure.
Most important thing is for people to get on, because once this child is born, it's certainly not going to help the child for lawsuits to be going back and forth between the mother and the father. Hopefully you'd want the mother to realize that the father is still going to have an importance in that child's life, and the father to recognize that, and certainly once that child is born, that they would move on, both of them, in a cooperative manner to bring that child up with both parents fully recognized in the child's life.
This brings on another interesting question: the slippery slope concept, where if a woman can exclude a man from seeing his child being born, where does this exclusionary process stop? Can she exclude him from seeing this child graduate from the 8th grade? Or can she exclude him from visions? It just seems like it could all start from there.
Well, this is where, of course, a lot of the family court issues that we see today are all about. And I would say certainly whether it's with men's rights or with organizations such as ourselves that try to promote the interests of the child so that both parents are recognized. This is what a lot of these court battles are all about. But as I said, when you get into the actual delivery room, when you're talking about a couple that no longer like each other, and the woman doesn't want that person there to sit and look at their naked body, that's a little bit different. But once that child is born, that child has rights now, and and that's where we all hope that the movement for justice, which is the way our organization looks at it, because we tend not to be a gender organization. We look at this as an issue of justice. Is that you have a child born, and in the sake of justice, that child deserves to know and to have a reasonable relationship with both parents, throughout his or her life.
Right. James, it's 9:45 right now. Do you want to go with your next story, or do you want to go right to the guest?
Did you guys want to hear a story from Canada here?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, go for it, and then, go ahead and go with the interview.
Now, again, as I said, normally Canada Court Watch, we're not really a gender-based organization because we do help men and women, but I know that you guys are mainly more into men's issues, but there is a recent men's issue.
Fine, whatever.
Yeah. There is a men's issue that just came across in our area here, just as of yesterday. Now, this is a story that came out of the organization called CAFE, Canadian Association for Equality. Now, a man by the name of Dan Parents, he just completed a 120-kilometer walk from Hamilton, Ontario, to Toronto, and completed it just last Friday. And he started a hunger strike in front of the Queen's Park Legislature. That's our government buildings here in Ontario. And his issue is that there are no shelters for male victims of abuse, trauma, and domestic violence. There are many shelters throughout, certainly in this province of Ontario, equivalent to one of your states down there, but there are many women's shelters throughout the province of Ontario, but there are no men's shelters. And there are men who are being abused. I probably have 2 or 3 of them that I'm working with right now. Been thrown in jail, been thrown out of their houses. They've had their money taken out of their bank accounts, can't see their kids. I could go on with a list. But this particular person here is on a hunger strike right now. I think it started last Friday, but yeah, and that's his name, Dan Parents. And that's his issue.
We're very good friends with Dan, and actually we've been following the story very closely.
Oh, you have? Okay, good.
Yeah, he's on staff here at AVFM. He's actually the Canadian news director.
Oh, really?
I'm so glad you brought. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought the story up because it really is a big deal. And Dan, being the kind of person that he is not scared to make a splash, as it were. And this is, of course, very serious. This is a hunger strike. As I don't mean to make light of it at all when I say make a splash, but yeah, Dan Parents is really doing something very, very important. He's following in the steps of Earl Silverman, who committed suicide a couple of years ago, and I'm sure you recognize that name.
I knew Earl, and I used to communicate with him a number of years ago. Yeah, before he died. Yeah, I probably still got a bunch of emails in my inbox from him when before he passed. but there certainly is.
Actually, I've been dying to talk to someone that knew Earl personally, besides Dan and other people, because there's so much about his death that is still such a mystery, and about the circumstances that led him to commit suicide. I'd love to learn more about it, but it's been very difficult to find out information about it. So, but
Yeah, I
anyway,
usually,
maybe we'll get to that.
certainly in the course of my years, I guess working as an advocate here, yeah, I guess there's been several suicides. I think mostly males. I think there was one mother that committed suicide because of the child protection, but number of men that I've was dealing with, and they'd be there. One week they'd be there and wouldn't hear anything from them, and only to find out maybe some weeks later that they had taken their lives. But certainly the shelter system here, certainly in Ontario, is a problem. I even get calls from women complaining about the shelters, how they basically many of them.
About that.
Well, there are a lot of women's shelters, many of them.
Right.
I wouldn't say all of them. Actually, there's a couple of the women's shelters that actually make referrals to me, to our organization. Primarily, some of the women they're being persecuted by child protection agencies. They've been made into single mothers, and now they're easy to attack. But I had to give you an example. Well, you must know Erin Pizzey, do you?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I mean, I've known her for many years. We've had her over, and Senator Ann Cools. Both of those women. I mean, Erin Pizzey started the first women's shelter in the world. Senator Ann Cools had I think it was the first women's shelter here, or was involved here with one of the first ones here in Canada. And both of them have said that the shelter industry has basically, in many cases, turned into centers where they promote the hatred of fathers and men. Right. And I even myself, I do videotaped interviews, and I interviewed a couple kids. Now this is a few years ago in a shelter near me, but there was a little boy and a little girl. They were about 7 and 8 years of age, and their mother actually called me. You know, she would discuss it, but she described where the two kids were. They were told that they were going to go into, a children's program at the shelter, but the mothers weren't allowed to go in with the children. They just said, we want the kids to be able to be themselves, to go in on their own, and they were told it was just an innocent little program to help these kids kind of recover, after
things out,
that type of thing. Well, anyways, the mother called me, and she was just furious. She said that the women who were at the women's shelter, and I interviewed the kids afterwards, and I do have video statements from these children, but the little girl was telling me that they were shown a video of what she referred to as daddies beating up mommies. So it was, one of these kind of some kind of a video of men being abusive to women. And the little girl told me that when she grew up, that her boyfriend was going to be like that, or her husband. And that this was the way. So they were basically training these young girls, especially
very impressionable, their children.
Yeah, to teach them that when they get older, basically boys were bad, men were bad, their boyfriends are going to be bad, and their future husbands are going to be bad people. And it was the mother who called me, and she was furious when her kids told her this. And and she really did. And she said, I was the one she said, I went to the center because I was told I had to go by the police. And she said, I was the one that hit him. But they kicked him out of the house.
And she actually said that. And then she got sent to the shelter, and they basically took her children and started indoctrinating them in this
she was furious at this, and then that's not the only case I've had.
Of course not.
I have another video of another woman. I've had 3 or 4 women. I've got another video of a woman. She said she went to the shelter. Now, she was there for economic reasons.
Right.
She didn't leave an abusive.
Not because she was abused, but because she was homeless or whatever. Or,
Yeah. She was.
As are a lot of women in
Yeah.
domestic violence shelters. There are a lot of just women are there because they're homeless or they're drug addicts or they have mental illness problems and they have no other place to go. And there it is.
She said that, and I have it on video. And she disclosed. She said, "I witnessed more abuse in the shelter," she said, that I did outside. She says the women were fighting with each other, swearing. Little kids were being exposed to swear words and that.
Right. Yeah.
And she was told too, because many of the shelters get a lot of donations from corporations, and so they have a large donation room. So women are allowed to go in there if they need clothes, if they need appliances and things like this. They can go in, especially when they find a place, they're allowed to go through and pick out appliances and furniture to get them set up in a new place. And she said that she was told right out that if she didn't engage in sex with the lesbian workers, that she was going to get kicked out, and she would.
Heard that before.
Yeah, and she was told that unless she engaged in sex with the workers, that basically she was going to get kicked out. And even at one point, when she went to a lawyer, she was referred to a lawyer who is a lesbian lawyer.
Oh, yeah, right.
And
there's nothing wrong with being a lesbian, but clearly, and I've heard this before, there's like this agenda, this sexual agenda, with a lot of domestic violence shelter workers.
Yeah,
that I hear this over and over again, and you just can't avoid it.
And my sister, here's another twist of it. My sister, she's been going to church, and she's a very good person in the community, a hard worker. She's been a member of the church for like about 30 years. She lives in another community, but she knows nothing, really knew nothing about all this stuff. And she went and applied. She said, she thought that there were abused women, so she said she went to apply at a shelter to help. She said, I sincerely went there. I wanted to help. I thought that there's these abused women. But she said she was taken through a series of questions, and she said, I could see after a while, she says, I've got a good background. I've got training. I got all these things. But she says, I figured out about 3/4 of the way through the interview, she says, I was about the truth. I was about being honest. I was about wanting to help people. And she said, I could see that they didn't want that.
They don't want that.
They wanted somebody. So she said, here I was, ready to work on a voluntary basis, and they would not take me in. And she didn't realize it at the time, but it was probably about 5 years later, due to my activities, that she found out more about all these problems. And she says, well, yeah, that kind of answers my question why they didn't want me back then. She said, I was the type of person that would not follow their agenda. She said, I'm fair. She said, I would treat a man and a woman the same. And she said that it appeared because I wouldn't follow their agenda,
or subscribe to their worldview. They have a worldview that they see.
To be anti-man, anti-men. They did not want to bring me in as a volunteer.
Let's start the interview afresh, if we could. I want to do a proper introduction and allow you to talk about your organization. We are here tonight with Vernon Beck from Canada Court Watch, and they are an organization that's been around for a while, and they are not a men's rights organization, although increasingly they find themselves more and more engaged in activities that help men, because the courts, the family courts especially, are biased against men. And Vernon Beck, how long have you been with Canadian Court Watch?
Well, I guess Canada Court Watch has been around.
Canada Court Watch. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, we were, I guess, been around about 20 years. I guess started around 1995. That's when I got the organization started. And
were you completely alone when you started the organization? Was it just you, or?
Yeah, believe it or not, the idea just came out of a notion I had one time. Is I had gone through a divorce and or a separation, and I saw some problems where I was discriminated against.
Right.
It wasn't severe, but I saw the injustice. There was something wrong. there, to the point where it was harming children. We had one child, but there were I had two previous children, and the mother had two previous children, and her children actually wanted to come and live with me. Okay. But they weren't allowed to, and so I seen this injustice going on, and that caught my interest. Now I didn't get severely affected. I mean, I managed to keep my home and was okay in that. But I saw this injustice, and I started to, I guess, to find out more that I wasn't alone. That this was just, it seemed to be this was the way the family court system was operating at the time. And so the idea that came to me of, we need to watch the courts. Something is wrong. So the idea of Canada Court Watch, that was something that just came to me in the concept that came to me in the middle of the night. And I got up, I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I wrote an article. It was called, and I named it Canada Court Watch Report. And that's where the idea started. And the idea was to monitor, to find out what's going on, to see what these injustices were. And I started by getting into mediation. I took mediation training, because at first my first thought was saying, well, geez, these people at the courts, they don't get it. There's something wrong. I can see what the problem is. Why can't they say it? So I said, well, maybe they we need some other services. We need something. So I said, well, we need some mediators. Okay, maybe the court could benefit by mediation. So back around 95, 96, I got mediation training to do family mediation, and I formed a conflict resolution organization called Family Conflict Resolution Services, and I started developing a program. I got about, I think I had about a advisory committee of about 30 lawyers and psychologists and doctors, fairly reputable people, who signed into a committee. We formed a committee, and I started a program called the Family Assistance and Parent Support Program, which was based on the idea that when couples are separating, that you bring in what I refer to as family coordinators, people who would help communicate with the couple, help them resolve issues, so you don't have to go to court. In other words, it's very, very similar, I guess, to the natives call them healing circles. There are some concepts out there called restorative justice, but the idea is you bring in people, whether it's friends, family, relatives, people in the community. The idea was to try to keep people out of court so that they're not in the court system. So I developed that system over about 2 years. But then I started, as I started to apply it in the courts and trying to do some mediation and things like that, it became apparent to me that the courts didn't want it. It appeared that they didn't want solutions.
Right. Right.
That they didn't want it. And at that point, I began to realize that it was more of a game. At that point, I start to realize
had nothing to do with people like not being capable, or just they don't understand what's going on, or they're ignorant. They were actually corrupt people. Is that what you're trying to say? Like, we finally realized that the system was corrupt, and then you came to this epiphany after, like, they decided they didn't want to be reformed, that they were corrupt. Was there?
That may be a way, and I would say maybe I would probably tend to use the system. Maybe it's corrupted because I still believe, certainly in my experience, there are many good people within the system, whether they be lawyers. There are some good judges.
Sure.
There are, just like anything. But what it is that there are a number of them that are corrupt. There are a number of them that are not accountable. They promote this. And unfortunately, as in many organizations such as police, you're seeing that down in the U.S. right now. I still believe that as a whole, most police officers want to do a proper job. But what the problem is that probably the minority, they create a culture, and the minority end up controlling the majority. Because I've spoken to many good police officers. I work with some right now, They actually say that we're afraid to speak up. I can get a police officer. I can call a police officer from one of the police agencies, even different areas here. I can call and get some advice from them, but they say, look, don't say it comes from me. Okay, don't tell anybody I told you so, because they're afraid, because the bad cops or the bad people, whether it's in child protection. I've even had a judge call me one time to provide information, and he said, no one is to ever know I gave this to you, to your organization, because there'll be a lot of trouble for me.
Oh, it would end his career, most likely.
Yeah. So this is the type of thing that is going on. So I believe that in many of these organizations that are affecting, whether it be fathers, we find there's a lot affecting mothers as well. It's about the destruction of families. The family courts and these agencies appear to be about the destruction of families, and it's my belief that the minority of many of these workers have created a culture. It's like the women's shelters as well. There's a culture now. If you don't get a job there if you don't have that opinion, of who's there. And yes, there's a big job to restore justice and to weed out these people. This is what is happening. This is what social media is starting to do. Just like I said, even with the police in the U.S. right now. I mean, it's what's happening down there. I think it's going to make, hopefully, it's going to start to make major changes with police servicing in the U.S. We have a similar problem here as well. Police, certainly in domestic violence, it's mandatory that generally that the men get arrested, okay, and the women walk away. I'm dealing with a case right now. I've got a case where that's been the case. I think the poor young father, he spent 17 days in jail because he sent his girlfriend that they had just broken up, sent her flowers, but he had been doing it every month for about the last year. When they were together, he used to just automatically, the flower shop would every month send flowers, and they separated, and I think it was 2 or 3 months later, he'd sent flowers again. This time she decided to call the police. He ends up 17 days in jail. Okay.
Right. He forgot to close his account with the florist, so he goes to jail, basically.
Well, I don't think he really forgot, but he
flowers, so he goes to jail.
I think it's only natural. You get a young couple who break up. I mean,
of course,
yeah, they're still probably. I mean, she was. He showed me a bunch of texts. She was sending texts, "I miss you," and all kinds of stuff. 3 days before he sent the flowers, she was sending a text. "I miss you," and whatever. But I found out through some of my investigations that yes, she was actually baiting the guy. We've uncovered spring emails.
Yeah.
And so as I said, it's quite a story. But we have the same problem here with police being overly aggressive. I've spoken to many women. They're saying that they called the police because their boyfriend or their husband was being a jerk, and they're going to teach them a lesson by calling the police. And one woman, I just remember a few stories. One woman said, well, he put his hands across the doorway and wouldn't let me walk out to the other room. So I called the cops. I told him I was going to teach him a lesson. And the guy gets kicked out of his house and can't see his kids for 6 months.
Yeah, right.
And she's calling us saying, what can you guys do to help me? She says, the guy's a great father. She said, I was probably being just nice. She says, I was the one that threw the clock at him,
Yes.
before he put his hands up.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, and clearly I was the one who was upset, and it wasn't him. He was probably just trying to keep me from going outside and making a jerk of myself outside the building.
Well, I want to add something to that. There's a lot of domestic violence instances that involve alcohol or drug use, and both of these problems can be treated. They're not so much like a serious problem with the personality of the person, where that person is necessarily abusive. They may suffer from mental illness or something like that. There are people who have these problems that need help, that instead of getting help, they get thrown in jail.
Yeah, and
and
that's
and that's just, I think that's terrible. I
yeah.
think that's terrible that we have this system that does this to people who quite frankly are vulnerable.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the reports. I just submitted a report. It went into a court yesterday. It was a forensic report that I did, and that's one of the points that I raised. In my executive summary. At the end of my executive summary, I put in there that tragically, this whole sequence of events, these young people getting charged, and friends now getting caught fabricating evidence and making false reports to police. This is just a tragic outcome of the adversarial family court system, which forces parents to take an adversarial role, encouraged by their lawyers, of course, to basically go out to destroy their partner and to get everything that they can, whether it's the child, the money, the house, the whole bit. The system is created now to literally force people, because if you lose, if you're at the losing end of the stick, if you don't get custody of the child, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage. And,
Yeah.
and this is the problem. When they throw people in jail, they criminalize people. Just like I was saying, this father that sent flowers, he's got a 4-year-old son, and he says, you know what? He says, I'm a hardworking, honest businessman. He says, I've been in business. I got a good family. I've got relatives. We have strong network. We have friends who are police officers. Even they can't believe what's been done to me. He says, because I sent those flowers, I cannot even take my child down to Disney World now in Florida and to give my son, because when you've been charged and you can't cross into the U.S. Okay, I think it takes many years before you can actually get across the border.
Right.
So here he is saying that because of his
That's just because you were charged, right?
just
We're not convicted. Just
yeah. And that's what it is. That's one of the realities. I mean, everybody in Canada would love to go down to Disney World in Florida and take their kids down. But here he is, a young father. He's just turned 30. He says, I can't even take my son down to give him that now because of that. I had one father a few years ago who had, again, a silly thing. I think it was yelled. We have a saying up here, and one of the lawyers gave it to me one time. A good lawyer by the name of Walter Fox. He says the quote here that the lawyers have, that a lot of us joke about it. He says, "Yell at your house and lose your house," or "Yell at your spouse and lose your house." That's the kind of the
right.
quote that the lawyers would joke amongst themselves. But I had one father who had faced some minor charges, and he had I think bail. It was just a restraining order to keep away, but he had made it down. He had gotten across the border. This a few years ago, but he'd gotten down to the border. This is before the 7/11, but he had gotten down into the U.S. I think he was down in some place like Georgia or someplace in the southern states, and he got pulled over for speeding.
Right.
And he had his 2 kids in the car, and that's where they're heading. They're heading to Disney World. And he said, somehow or other, he says it showed up on the police thing that he had this bail, and he says he was pulled out of his car, and he was taken away from the kids. He was exported. He was taken out of the U.S., taken back to the border, and taken out of the country. And he says they stopped us right there. He says we were probably about 6 hours from Disney World, and he says the whole thing was destroyed. My children's trip was destroyed simply because of some stupid thing he says that happened about 3 or 4 years ago, where we yelled at each other. And because what they do is if there is a situation, they say, well, I'll tell you what, plead guilty to and we'll give you this lesser charge.
Exactly. The exact same thing happens here in the U.S.
You don't go to jail. We'll let you off. Everything will be nice.
Put off this big rosy thing, and you won't be affected by it for the rest of your life. After you just do this thing, you go to jail. But the fact is, you are affected with it your entire life, because you can't travel, you can't do things that it erodes your citizenship, basically. Is what
there's no doubt about that, and especially with the U.S. now that they've got the after 7/11 there, where they had the the terrorists, everything's become very controlled now. I mean, they're very careful at the border now who they check over and things like that. So it's just not the way. It's destroying, it's taking away opportunities of children. The way the police and these courts are solving it, it's not working. The system is not working. In fact, our Supreme Court judge here, Thomas Cromwell, actually went on. He's one of the Supreme Court of Canada judges. Actually, has gone on public record and said that the family court system in Canada is broken, and that it is causing a lot of harm to estranged spouses and their children. And so there's been several fairly senior judges have said the same thing, that the way that the system is dealing with it is causing more harm than good, and that's a real tragedy.
Let's go back to talking about Canada Court Watch. If you could give us some history about the development of since when you started it 20 years ago. What has it become? What have your goals changed? And what was the original goal? Was basically to kind of point out inconsistencies and problems in the system, but now there's a realization that the system itself is corrupt and the corruption must be exposed.
Well, as I said, in the earlier phases, that's kind of what we thought. We just thought maybe we need some new programs that would help, and it became apparent that, as I said, the system didn't seem to want to bring in changes. So we kind of went into another phase where we actually went into to actually report. We used to actually have court reporters, and we still do on a minor basis. But we actually go around. We used to have trainees. We would train them about going into the court. We would wear badges. We had created our own identity badges, and we would walk into a court, go into a courthouse, and we would split up, have one or two people go into various courtrooms with these badges. It said Canada Court Watch with our photo ID on it and what have you. And of course, it caught everybody's attention. Everybody would look around and say, well, "Who are these guys?" And our purpose then was to get stories. So we used to write articles. They were, in the early years, they were called Canada Court Watch reports. There are a number of them on our website back then. So we got into doing these reports and exposing some of the corruption going on.
Can you tell me? I'm sorry, I don't mean to break you midstream, but here in the U.S., there are a lot of family courts that will not let any reporters in to the courtroom. There's no public accountability. What's the difference between the U.S. and Canada?
Well, in Canada, the legislation says that courtrooms are to be open to the public. That's the general principle, that courtrooms are open to the public. Now, one of the things that you guys have in the U.S., to my understanding, certainly talking to people in the U.S., is that video cameras are more common in many of your courtrooms down there.
Now they are. They used to not be.
Yeah, we don't have video in the courtrooms yet. It's in the upper courts, but where all the real damage is done in the family courts, where all the lies, the perjury, the we have a problem. Even transcripts are being fixed by judges and court reporters. We have a problem. We want to see video cameras brought into the courts, and that is one of the initiatives that we are working on, is to bring cameras into the courts. We're also trying to bring in an initiative as well that police officers, certainly right across the province, and police officers at the courthouses, they be required to carry video and audio recording devices at all times when they are working with members of the public, because again, there are some horrendous things being done where the police are being unaccountable. They're making threats, they're lying, they're violating people's rights. This is going on. I've got kids being arrested just because child protection agencies want to talk to them. They haven't broken any law. Their rights are being grossly violated. They're being handcuffed, thrown in jail by officers who wrongly believe that they are supposed to take orders from a child protection worker. Okay, so these are some of the initiatives that we're doing insofar as the audio and video recording. And over the years, we've launched, I guess, educational programs. For instance, teaching people how to record. in the last number of years, with the use of cell phones and miniaturized audio recording devices, a lot of people now, we've started training people, when and how and to protect yourself by using audio recording equipment. There have been many cases that have been won by the fact that people have protected themselves with audio recording equipment. So I think as the years went on, we kind of moved into a phase where we have a Facebook group that gets a lot of activities on it. We have videos. So a lot of our work right now is educational. We do lecturing. For instance, I lecture at some of the colleges and universities in regards to family law, child protection law.
How did you manage that? I'm curious because someone tries to do that here in the U.S. where they talk about the corruption of the family court system and they're on a college campus. Most oftentimes, there's going to be some big problem with.
Well, usually a lot of the teachers, are allowed to invite someone in and to teach for class. Like I went to, I think it was to the university here in Toronto, and I lectured to the journalism students. Okay, because they didn't know any about this, about their rights to record. Like in Canada here, journalists in the courtroom, they have the right to record to supplement their notes.
And these journalism students didn't know this when they were going to school?
They didn't know it, no. Most of them didn't know it.
They were not told that as basic journalistic training?
They were not told that about a lot of them actually believed they couldn't do it.
Sure.
Okay. I taught a course last year at the graduating child and youth workers at a college here in Peterborough. And again, even the teacher who invited me in, he said, we can't put this stuff on as part of the curriculum. He said, it's not politically correct, but he says, you coming in as a guest speaker for an afternoon and giving these students is something I can do. He's got the leeway here. So certainly these things, I've been to some high schools. So certainly people see our website, they hear about our name, and there is an interest. Sometimes community groups I'll speak at a library, small groups, maybe 50 people. I've been to larger crowds, where groups will organize. But so a lot of our work has kind of gone into educating and trying to develop materials that will assist children and parents. We do something that's fairly unique. We do taping of children who are being, say, abused in the child protection, kids that are in foster care or group homes that have been taken away from the families. We'll do video interviews with them to get some of these stories. So we're gathering stories, and I guess a lot of our work in recent years has been gathering what I refer to as the body of evidence. We're gathering testimony by way of video, affidavits. Right. We're gathering some of the stories that we get involved with. We're learning some of these, whether you call them tricks or tactics, that various organizations or officials use to create an injustice. We're learning some of these things, and what we try to create is methodologies and information that will help teach people how to defend themselves. Because we believe is that the more people who learn about their rights, the more people that can learn how to defend themselves, whether it's in family court or whether it's with child protection. One of the things we're working on right now is we're working on our own courses to teach parents about equal parenting, about when parents separate, how to get these parents to stop fighting, how to teach them how to engage in cooperative parenting, but with some of the real realities that other people have run into that usually the mainstream courses don't tell you about. We're going to have a course for children so that when their parents are not being fair to each other, we want to teach kids how their parents are supposed to behave so that the children can learn for themselves, what is right, what is wrong, what is good behavior, what is bad behavior. because we believe that we have to teach even our young children. We have to teach them about their rights, their responsibilities. I think in the U.S., I think your citizens and probably your children are probably taught at a much younger age about your rights and freedoms down there, because I think in America
that's changed, actually. Yeah, and actually, before I say anything else, I want to apologize for the comment I made about how, like, when people speak up in U.S. campuses, there's a big problem. There's a much bigger problem in Canada. I just wanted to correct myself there. But
there certainly is a problem, certainly with men's rights, where they're speaking. As you know,
right.
Probably aware of CAFE.
Oh yeah, sure. I wanted to say that to our listeners because I know that somebody would have called me on the comment that I just made. So
yeah,
but I want to ask you, if I could go on to another question. The domestic violence laws here in the U.S. and in Canada are closely paralleled with each other. Is that true?
I sense that it is, but I'm not aware of the legislation, and I don't deal with that many cases in the U.S. where I'm actually that intimately involved. But
and this is kind of what I wanted to, where I wanted to ask you questions, because to me it seems like as soon as the Violence Against Women Act came out in 1994, a lot of the same things started happening in Canada, but there's a whole different flavor to what's going on. But the whole thing, to me, seems to be where it's all about money, political power, and the erosion of basic civil rights for people accused of crimes.
And I would agree with you that. And for instance, I know, I guess you call it the Violence Against Women Act. I guess the VAWA, is it they call it down there? Yeah,
that's what they call it down here. It just seems that there's really no equivalent piece of legislation in Canada.
No, I don't think there's actually equivalent. They've enacted various pieces of acts that in a sense do the same thing. In Ontario, for instance, they referred to it as zero tolerance policy. So they've adopted this zero tolerance policy. Well, ask any police
officer. Policy level and not at the legal level.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, here it's at the legal level, but maybe at the policy level, it's all the same thing.
Yeah. But there is a huge amount of funding, and that's where it's filtered out to the women's groups here in Canada.
Absolutely, it's all about the money. It's all about the money.
And there's a huge amount of money. So I had one, I think it was somebody in the Department of Justice call me, and they said, really what was going on is they're trying to build statistics.
Oh yeah, they're trying to substantiate their perverted narrative with false statistics.
Yeah, so they want to get they'll arrest a man and let the women off, even though she may have assaulted at the same time, might have been mutual. They'll only arrest one person because they're saying that will show the statistics that there's more abused men. Therefore, we need more money for the women's shelters.
It's the same reason why they try to undersell or try to discredit the entire false allegation issue.
Yeah,
which is a huge thing, because these people do not actually want to help victims. They want more victims so they can get more money, and that is the absolute truth.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Yeah.
They don't. I mean, they really don't. I mean, I try to explain this to my female friends. I'm like, feminists really they don't like you. They don't care about you. You are a number to them, and the more numbers they have, or the more they can present the numbers in the way that they feel represents their worldview, the more money they will get. And it has nothing to do with equality or helping women or children. It has nothing to do with that.
It gets down to, as I said earlier, a lot of this comes about from the destruction of the family. You break the family up because of domestic violence or little things like that, just crazy, stupid things, yelling, or
somebody threw a bottle cork at me.
Yeah, and I've had things. In fact, one guy was saying he was charged assault with a weapon, and he said it was she threw a box of macaroni and cheese at him. Those little boxes that are about an inch thick.
Yeah, right.
Said, she threw it at me, and he says I threw it back. He says I got charged for assault with a weapon.
With a weapon, right?
With a weapon. Okay, and he just called me a couple days ago, and that's what he got charged for. Now she never got charged.
Okay, even though she was the assailant, the
Yeah,
initial assailant.
she was the instigator of it.
Yeah.
And he just thought he said it was. He says I thought it was funny at the time. She says she threw this little box of macaroni and cheese at me. So he says I just threw it back at her.
Yeah.
And
now it's not so funny.
now he says. So I get this all the time, and then I find that the women now suddenly that puts the family into an economic crisis because
Right.
In this day and
Pay
age,
for lawyers, yeah.
in this day and age, most families are struggling. Most it takes a father and a mother or two people now to maintain a household, to pay the rent. That's just the economic realities of the world that we live in today. So as soon as you get one of the partners out of the house, now suddenly they can't pay the rent.
Yeah.
Now then, what I'm
They're
finding,
getting food stamps. They're all of a sudden they're dependent on government now, and that's key.
they're actually being told to go on welfare now.
Yep.
Okay. And then the welfare people.
There's armies of people that will assist them in this process to let's get dad out of the house, and we'll set you up in a situation where you're just getting dad's now replaced by the state, basically.
Yeah. And I get women calling me, and they say, "This is not what we want. It's wrong. My children want to see their father, and sometimes I speak to the kids. I've had the kids, 9, 10 years old. I want to see my dad. Why can't I?" And the mothers are told that if you allow the children to see their father, okay, until the court matters are dealt with, which sometimes could take a year. If you allow the children to see their father, we are going to take your children away and put them into child protection. We'll put them into foster care group homes.
Exactly. Right.
That's what's going on. And now the mothers become terrified. They feel that they're being abused. Now the kids feel abused. Everybody loses respect for the courts. They lose respect for the police. They lose respect for child protection. And it turns into just a massive nightmare for the whole family. And in the meantime, the only people that are profiting are these groups that are supposedly providing help to them, and they're all getting paid government money to run these organizations.
What kinds of things is what kinds of things is Canada Court Watch doing right now? Has it been the same that's always been where you and expose what's happening with the family courts, or just any other court, or has there been a time when you've actually changed direction, and if so?
Well, our some of our basic initiatives are still the same. Some of our focuses maybe have changed as far as the emphasis that we put on things. As I said, I think right now one of our main focuses is trying to create information that will help parents fight and protect their families, because it's our belief that the more people who are out there and the more people who are able to effectively defend their families, there's only so much government money going around. Okay, the government can only hand out so much. Eventually, the system is going to collapse upon itself because it just will not be able to fund it. So our thought is that the more people who are trained and can put up a resistance, the quicker this is going to happen. A reality will come into play. And of course, social media is something that was not around 20 years ago like it is today. People have cell phones now. I mean, you have cell phones now, you can record your telephone conversations on them. So people now are starting to capture this corruption. Judges are becoming more aware. We actually do see a shift now. I'm certainly seeing a shift, although it's certainly not equal yet. There's certainly more of a shift now toward, at least in the family courts, there appears to be a little bit of a shift toward giving fathers more access and more time with children, which is good.
Why even though there's no basic policies that have changed or basic laws that have changed, within the discretion of judges themselves, men are getting more time with their children, more equitable settlements.
Yeah, the message is getting out, and that's why I say social media.
So you think, and I remember Robert Franklin he had said this many times before. Robert Franklin, Um, he said that if you just show up for the fight, you'd be amazed at what happens. Do you think that only now uh, uh, advocates for family law reform are just now showing up for the fight, and you think that that somehow made the courts and judges particularly aware that they can't just do whatever they want to do? Do you think that's the main thing?
Well, of course it is. Yeah, it's having an effect. Yeah, they know that the public now is becoming more aware
Aware of what they're doing. Yeah.
of what's going on, and the public is turning away from the courts. They're no longer trusting them. They're no longer trusting the police agencies when it comes to family court.
Do you think it's because the courts are being the reason the courts are engaging the behavior they are right now by kind of like a stepping back or backpedaling behavior? Do you think it's because they want to prolong what they have and milk it for more and more, or at least as much as they can get before it all falls apart? Or do you think they're actually genuine in their feelings like, hey, we've really screwed up and we really need to fix the system? Or is there a mixture of both?
I think, I don't know, I personally feel that I think that they know there's something wrong, but because of this culture that's infiltrated throughout the court system and throughout the child protection and throughout the police,
right?
They're still used to the standard way of doing it,
Right.
things, and it takes time for things to start to change. And
It's deeply systemic, is what you're saying.
it's very systemic, yeah, and
It's been going on for decades now.
yeah.
There are people who've made their careers off of this stuff.
Yeah, and I would say probably, yeah, maybe about the last 40 years, I suppose, when it really started. I mean, I myself, I know when my first marriage broke up, I took care of my two daughters. They were about 6 and 7 at the time. I was a single dad. I never went after child support. I raised my two kids, kept on speaking terms with their mother. She just, she was young at the time, and to this day, I never collected a penny in child support from the two kids I raised. I can still talk. The mother, even though my kids are in their 40s, we can still go and sit down at whether it's a birthday party, wedding, whatever. There's no problem there. There wasn't this adversarial process way back then. And this is just something that seems to have developed in the last maybe 35, 40 years, where it's gotten to the point where it is, because there's so much government money now being fed into this into this machine.
This is interesting, and this is a topic that comes up all the time when we talk about family court reform, and when it comes to family law in both Canada, the U.S., the UK, Australia, and India, places around the world, where increasingly it's not about helping children or making sure families stay together, which is the best thing for children, but it's about the dissolution of the family. And there are many people who say, well, the family is the enemy of the state. Indeed, the father is the enemy of the state, because we have a man, and Imprezi has talked about this a lot, where if you have a situation where you have a man and a woman living under the same roof with their children, if you have that situation, they're in good shape. The guy goes out and provides for the family, and typically he's a much better provider than the government ever could be. But not only that, there's also this barrier between state control and the family. A man who is doing this for his family is much more likely to be the one to put a boundary and say, hey, the state's not going to tell me how to feed my kids, it's not going to tell me how to raise my kids, it's not going to tell me to do this, it's not going to tell me that. But when you get that guy out of there, all of a sudden you don't have a family anymore. You have a woman and children, or child or children. And that's, first of all, that's not a family. Second of all, by nature, women and dependent children are dependent creatures, and they are much more susceptible to state control. Do you think that this is and I believe this, but do you think that this is the underlying reason why so much money has been given to these organizations and to this ideology that is so anti-father, that is so so much really obsessed with the idea of separating really not helping children or helping women, but simply from separating children from their fathers, because that is the overlying theme I see all the time. What do you think
Well,
about that analysis of it?
well, I guess I'm not so far along to actually think that there's somebody up in government or that there's some higher power up there actually saying this is what we're going to do. Kind of gets back to what I said earlier. I think this culture builds in to, and it may be part of our human psyche. Sometimes I'll say to people, what is it that back when they were hunting witches, we can go back to the days of Salem. What is it that would actually make, people are probably not that much intellectually different than we are today. We probably have, our brains can function just as much back then as they do now. We may not have had the education and the knowledge that we had, but the people still had the same reasoning powers probably as we did today. What is it that would actually make people in a whole community think that a woman was a witch to the point they're going to take her and burn her? Okay, it's like a crowd mentality. And as I said, this is what I kind of feel has happened in the justice system. Another example, you could go back into the black community in the U.S. back in the 50s. I could remember when I was a young kid, when I was young enough, I remember the days of Martin Luther King, and he's one of my heroes in a sense, because he stood up. But where were the blacks back then? What is it that made a whole country, the white, everybody else, think that these people were bad? And yet here we are 70, 60 years later, there's a black president, okay? And certainly the rights of black, there's still some discrimination out there, there's no doubt about that, but certainly things have changed. But so I think we have a similar thing, is that, and I've heard people say that, is that fathers today are the black people that were, equate them to the blacks in the U.S. many years ago. It's just a different. But I think the underlining forces are there, that there's this culture, and then of course you get money being fed to certain groups that are actively promoting these beliefs and cultures. I think we see about ISIS. There's all these terrorist groups going on. Spreading their beliefs, through certain ways. And I think we have the same thing that's gone on. I don't think that there was a power or there's some person at the top saying this is what we're going to do. I think it's just all these systems.
I think it's just kind of like an organic thing.
It's an organic thing that's kind of grown there, and sometimes, it's not something.
Would you agree that it's a totalitarian mindset? I think I would.
Yeah, I think so.
Even if it's not like some person or some individual or some small group of people, it's still a statist totalitarian mindset.
Yeah,
that's what I would say. But
yeah, and I think it's something with again, it's probably got something to do with the human mind, with just us as humans. Because again, you could go back to Second World War. There's a good lawyer. I mentioned his name earlier, Walter Fox. He always quotes. There was, what is it that made so many good German people during the war be the ones that kept the trains on time and things like that? These people were not murderers, but yet their little task, to make that train, to put the fuel in that
millions of people to die, basically.
Yeah. So what is it that creates people to do this? They weren't intentionally probably murdering, but they blanked their mind and simply said, I don't want to know, I'm just here to lube the wheels on the train. I don't know what the train's carrying. So I think we're kind of in the same thing today. We have these systems, they're all pushing in the same thing. It's the breakup of the family, and we're seeing a lot of this, and of course we're having a lot of social problems, probably in the US as well.
Yeah,
this is where you're getting the gangs, the kids. We have the same thing here in Canada. I talk
in the UK too. It's the exact same.
I interview. Well, one of the things I do is I interview these kids who are teens now, and they talk about how they were taken from their families. The fathers were separated. Mothers now are on welfare. Now the mothers have problems. The child protection system comes in. Now they get paid to take the children from the mothers.
Right.
Okay. And these kids describe talk about abuse. I mean, everything from sexual assault. You know,
Yep.
they can get cigarettes when they're 12 years of age in these group homes. They're getting raped.
Foster care system is really, really, really corrupt here in the
Yeah.
U.S. and I hear horror stories. I mean, not all of them are bad.
No, there's
I
always
did foster parents when I was growing up.
yeah. There's always good.
They were great people, wonderful people. But at the same time, you hear horror stories about, and the system just seems to enable it.
And you know, I have kids even today. Like up here, the government funds, if you're in foster care, the government will fund you until you're 21 years of age. If you're on welfare, for instance,
Yeah.
If you leave home at 16 and you leave your parents voluntarily for whatever reason, you don't like it at home, there, you know, some problems, you can go on the general welfare system. You get about $550 a month. It's just enough to rent a room somewhere, buy yourself a few groceries, whatever.
Right.
But if you were a kid from the foster care system, you know, and they decide to put you in what they refer to as independent living when you're 16, you can collect $950.
Well, that's a lot more money.
It's almost double the amount of money. So the kids are saying, well, I'm not going to go on welfare. I'm going to. In fact, I've had kids tell me when they're 15 years of age, they're told to leave their parents, come into foster care before they turn 16 years of age, so that now they
qualify for all this money every month.
They'll get this money until they're 21. And not only that, now the child protection agencies now are acting as their parents for the next 5 years. They're getting money to supposedly be the parent. And what these kids tell me, they said, you know, we got our check. I had one young man, he was 20 years of age. He says I get this check for $950. It's more than I get from welfare. I get this check. They might call me. He says I might get a call from a worker maybe once every 2 months. And she'll just say, how you doing? And of course, you're just going to say, everything's going fine. You know, everything's great. They never come around to see you. They don't check on you, whatever.
Yeah.
She said, you basically out there. And he says, me and a bunch of my buddies, he says, we've got enough to get our rent, and we got a lot of money left over now for booze and drugs. So we spend this extra money on booze and drugs now.
Sure.
And now they go and they can see their parents, okay, as independent. So here they are. They can go and visit their parents now. They can have dinner over at mom and dad's house, but they dare not leave government control now because they're getting this check for $950 a month.
Yep.
Even though their parents could go move back home, they're not going to cut themselves off from this $950 a month check.
Well, because now they're addicted to drugs now and alcohol. It's like,
well, it's sometimes they may not actually be addicted, but it becomes a way of life.
It's clearly that there had to been, and this is my cynical mind working here, but I mean I would think that any thinking person who thinks about these policies would say, you know what, that is a great way to make sure that parents and children are separated, is when we get the kids addicted to drugs when they're in adolescence, and we pay them, and now that they're addicted to drugs and they're getting money for said drugs, why would they ever give that up to go back with mom and dad? Or maybe that's just an organic aspect of it. I don't know.
And then soon as they accidentally have kids, or they get their girlfriends pregnant or whatever,
sure. Then the whole thing starts over again.
The system actually, we have them happening right now where they come in, they actually take the babies right at the hospital.
Oh God, jeez.
Yeah, they apprehend them right from the hospital now because you're on the system, and
oh Jesus.
Yeah, you got no family support now.
How often does that happen? Where they actually take the kids from the nursery ward?
It happens all the time. They take them right out of the mother's hands. In fact, there's a video out right on our website. It's called Baby Snatching. It's right, I think, on the Canada Court Watch main page. There's this movie. It's called Baby Snatching. But yeah, this goes on. I've got this case just happened 2 weeks ago. Same thing. They just, if you've been in care, they almost automatically will come in and take your kid.
Right.
And so that it just seems to be a complete destruction of the family, and then it becomes intergenerational. It just goes on to the next generation.
Sure. And all the while, there are a few people making lots of money.
Yeah.
And also, there's also people who are interested in political power too.
Yeah, and as I say, it just So it's going to take a while to break it down and expose these things, but it is starting to happen. Like I said, social media with video and audio recording devices are becoming, I think, very powerful tools now.
How optimistic are you that things are going to change for the better, or eventually get repaired?
If I didn't believe that things are going to change, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.
Right.
But as I said, there have been worse. If you go back through history, I mean, there's been a hell of a lot worse cases where groups of people have been persecuted than what's going on right now. It's just it's a different type of persecution. I sometimes say that in our culture over here, in Western culture, is that if you go over to some of the poorer countries, okay, I know whether you go over to Middle East or whatever, Africa, place like that. I mean, if there's a group down there, some of these terrorist groups or local groups, militias or whatever they want to call it, if you're not doing something, they just kill you. Okay, they just get rid of you. They just shoot you because you got nothing. But over here, what I say, we've been very fortunate in that we have developed a lot of wealth. And that the baby boomer generations, most of the elderly parents now, grew up in a generation where there has been a lot of wealth. Okay, they have the houses, they've had the cars, they've got the retirement pensions and that. So you don't want to kill anybody here. You want their money. Their money's going to get you shoot somebody, you might just get that satisfaction, but it's just a feeling. If you got their money. So you have lawyers, you have the social workers, you have the judges, you have the psychologists, you name it. You could go down all these people providing services at the expense of tax dollars, okay, in a sense extracting money and wealth over to a different group of people. And so you have a lot of people leeching off off the wealth that's been gathered by society probably over the last 50 or 60 years. I don't think you would have seen any of this back in the 40s or 50s, even after the war. You wouldn't have seen this happening back then. Nobody had any money.
Right.
Okay. People had to stay together. Mothers and father. My mom and dad were together. They were almost together 60 years before they passed away. Okay. So you would have never seen this back then, but now we've reached this stage. There's so much money, it's easy. People can just split up their lives. There's all these agencies coming in for money to basically rip families apart. Right. And I'm convinced personally that there's probably less violence today than there was 50 years ago. And certainly there wasn't the breakup of the families, there wasn't the divorce and separations. But again, we probably won't know all the answers. It'll probably be in the history books after we're dead and gone, where these things may be a bit more closely looked at. But people could talk about, has TV been an influence? Has the fact that mothers and fathers have to work today? I'm sure that's an influence. Because my mom, when I was a kid, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was always there. There's always dinner. There was always there when we needed help. There was always a parent there to help us, to support us, to help us with homework, to have dinner, have our clothes washed. There was always a parent there. Today, most parents, just to survive, to carry a mortgage, they have to go out and work. So as a result, I think there are a number of influences that we may not all fully understand right now until the history books are written 50 years from now.
Okay, well, it's now about 11:15. I think that it's been a great show. I'd like to thank you for coming and joining us tonight. And I definitely want to get you back on the show again, because there's always been mention of Canada Court Watch by Attila Vincer and Cafe and a lot of people in Canada. And unfortunately, I never had you guys on the show before, but I'm really glad that you came on tonight. So definitely expect to be called back on the show if you can make it again, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, be a pleasure. Certainly bring if we now I have a better feel for what your program is like, and probably get some stories here and give some examples that, if you, for instance, have programs on a particular subject of interest, by all means I can gather some material, certainly from a Canadian perspective here, or some of the various initiatives that we're working on. One of our, I think I mentioned to you when I was before the show, was about our Family Justice Review Committee, that concept we're working on, which we believe is something that could be a concept that could be used right across North America, both in Canada and the U.S. So,
great. Well, I guess that does it. Thank you so much again for being on. James, do you have any final words for our listeners?
Yes, I do, folks. Take the red pill.